Imagine this, a text written by Jesus' own brother, and yet it is not in our Bible. An intriguing mystery, isn't it? What if I told you that this gospel is real and offers a unique perspective on the life of Christ? Why was it excluded from the scriptures we know today? Was there something they didn't want us to know? Well, the story is full of twists and surprising decisions. Let's go back in time to a period when Jesus' followers were spreading his message around the world. It was a time of intense debates and many versions of Christ's teachings were circulating. But what happened that led to the Gospel of James, Jesus' brother, being excluded from the biblical canon? And more, who decided which books would be part of the Bible and which would be left out? Was it a simple matter of theology, or were there other interests at play? Think about it. How would our faith be today if these texts had been included? And most importantly, what can we learn by knowing these stories that remained on the margins? Let's unravel this fascinating enigma together and understand how the formation of the New Testament shaped the faith we know today. Stay tuned, because the answer may surprise you. History and discovery of the Gospel of James. The Gospel of James, also known as the Proto-Evangelium of James, is a fascinating text dating back to the early centuries of the Christian era. Historically situated between the 2nd and 3rd centuries, it is not part of the canonical New Testament, but offers an intriguing look at the traditions and narratives surrounding the birth and childhood of Mary and Jesus. The historical context of this gospel is crucial to understanding the religious and cultural perceptions of the time. In a society where Christianity was beginning to consolidate, texts like the Gospel of James helped shape popular belief and religious practice. The circumstances of its discovery are equally interesting. The earliest historical records of the Gospel of James appeared around the 4th century, but it is believed to have much older origins. Manuscripts of the text have been found in various locations, including Egypt and Syria, signaling the widespread dissemination and acceptance of the text in different early Christian communities. This geographical spread highlights the influence of the Gospel, even though it was never officially canonized. However, the discovery of the Gospel of James was not an isolated event. It was found along with other apocryphal texts, leading scholars to scrutinize its authenticity and relevance. The ensuing academic and theological debates helped paint a clearer picture of the text's origin and importance. This also allowed for a deeper understanding of the religious practices and popular narratives that endured through the centuries. Additionally, the Gospel of James stands out for its literary style and detailed content. The richness of information and the way events are narrated offer a unique perspective on the lives of Mary and Jesus. Although not considered a historical document in the strict sense, it provides a glimpse into the oral traditions and beliefs circulating among early Christians. Finally, the discovery of the Gospel of James raised questions about the formation of the biblical canon and the criteria used for including or excluding certain texts. Analyzing its history and context allows us to better understand the complexity of early Christian development and the diverse currents of thought that coexisted at the time. Content and themes of the Gospel of James. The content of the Gospel of James is rich and detailed, offering narratives not found in the canonical Gospels. One of the main themes addressed is the birth and childhood of Mary, the mother of Jesus. The text meticulously describes Mary's miraculous conception, her birth, and her upbringing in the Temple of Jerusalem. These details not only enrich Mary's story, but also emphasize her purity and holiness from the beginning, aspects less emphasized in the canonical Gospels. Another central theme is the birth of Jesus. The Gospel of James provides a vivid description of Christ's birth, including details such as the cave in Bethlehem where Mary gave birth and the presence of midwives who witnessed the miracle. This narrative differs significantly from the canonical accounts, which are more concise and less detailed. The inclusion of additional characters and events offers a new and enriching perspective on the Nativity. Furthermore, the Gospel of James emphasizes the perpetual virginity of Mary, a theme that became fundamental to certain Christian traditions, especially in the Catholic and Orthodox churches. The idea that Mary remained a virgin before, during, and after Jesus' birth is a central point in the text, highlighting her sanctity and uniqueness. This emphasis can be seen as an attempt to protect and exalt the figure of Mary at a time when different interpretations and doctrines were in competition. Another notable difference from the canonical Gospels is the absence of narratives about Jesus' public life, his miracles, and his ministry. The focus of the Gospel of James is almost entirely on the childhood of Mary and Jesus, offering a sort of prequel to the more well-known events of the New Testament. This distinct approach raises interesting questions about the purpose and target audience of the text. Finally, the Gospel of James also addresses themes such as faith, obedience to God, and divine intervention in human life. The characters in the text frequently receive visits from angels and divine signs, reinforcing the idea of a divine plan in action. These narratives not only enrich the story, but also serve to inspire and strengthen the faith of the readers and listeners of the time. Criteria of canonicity in the early church. In the early centuries of Christianity, determining which books would be included in the New Testament was a complex and nuanced process. The leaders of the early church, such as bishops and theologians, used a series of criteria to decide which texts had sufficient authority to be part of the canon. Among these criteria, doctrinal conformity to the Christian faith was fundamental. If a text presented teachings that significantly diverged from apostolic tradition, it was promptly excluded or subjected to more rigorous examination. Another essential criterion was apostolicity, that is, the direct or indirect connection of the text to the apostles of Jesus. The early church highly valued writings attributed to apostolic figures because these individuals were considered eyewitnesses to the life and teachings of Christ. A text that could not be associated with an apostle or a direct disciple had little chance of being accepted as canonical. The liturgical usefulness of the text was also considered. Writings that were widely used in the liturgies, preaching, and catechesis of the church had a greater probability of being included in the New Testament. Community practice functioned as an indicator of the text's acceptance and relevance to the life and faith of the Christian community. Apostolic authority, in particular, proved to be a decisive criterion. Texts that could not demonstrate a direct connection to the apostles, or that were attributed to unknown or dubious authors, were generally not accepted. The early church was concerned with preserving the original message of Jesus and the apostles, and any document that did not meet this criterion was viewed with skepticism. Additionally, theological orthodoxy played a crucial role. Texts that promoted views considered heretical or contrary to established doctrine were immediately rejected. The Church was committed to maintaining the unity and coherence of its message, and any threat to this unity was treated seriously. The leaders of the early Church were determined to ensure that only texts that faithfully reflected the Christian faith were included in the New Testament. Authorship and dating of the Gospel of James. The authorship of the Gospel of James is a widely debated topic among scholars. Although the text is traditionally attributed to James, the brother of Jesus, most modern scholars believe it was written by an anonymous author. The dating of the Gospel of James is also uncertain, but many experts suggest it was composed in the late 2nd century, long after the apostles' deaths. Internal evidence, such as literary style and cultural references, indicates that the text was written in an early Christian context, but not apostolic. The author demonstrates a deep knowledge of Jewish traditions, but also incorporates elements that reflect the concerns and beliefs of the early Christian community. This suggests that the Gospel of James was written by someone well integrated into the Christian community, but not necessarily by an apostle or a direct disciple. External evidence, such as citations by other ancient Christian writers and the absence of mentions of the text in early canonical lists, also points to a late composition. The Gospel of James is not mentioned by any of the earliest church fathers, suggesting that it was not widely known or accepted in the first centuries of Christianity. This raises questions about the authenticity of the text's attribution to James. Analysis of the content of the Gospel of James also reveals some anachronisms and historical inconsistencies that make it difficult to accept an apostolic authorship. For example, the text describes events and practices not corroborated by other contemporary sources. These elements reinforce the theory that the Gospel of James was written by a later author more interested in promoting certain traditions and beliefs than in providing an accurate historical account. In summary, despite the traditional attribution of the Gospel of James to a member of Jesus' family, most scholars agree that it was written by an anonymous author in the late 2nd century. Analysis of internal and external evidence suggests that the text was composed in an early Christian context, but not apostolic, reflecting more the concerns and beliefs of the Christian community of that time than the direct teachings of the apostles. Rejection and theological controversies. When discussing the exclusion of the Gospel of James from the biblical canon, many theological and doctrinal factors come to light. One of the main reasons is the absence of apostolic authentication. The early leaders of the primitive church sought texts that could be directly attributed to the apostles or their immediate disciples. The Gospel of James, lacking a clear connection to any apostle, was viewed with suspicion. Moreover, the content of the text, which details the childhood of Mary and Jesus, raises questions about its conformity with the accepted narratives of the canonical Gospels. Another point of controversy is the presentation of ideas that do not align with the official doctrine of the Church. For example, the Gospel of James emphasizes the perpetual virginity of Mary, something that, although later adopted by the Catholic Church, was not universally accepted in the early centuries of Christianity. This aspect sparked heated debates among theologians, who were divided between those who saw spiritual value in the text and those who considered it heretical or, at the very least, apocryphal. Additionally, the dating of the Gospel of James contributed to its rejection. It is estimated that the text was written in the late 2nd century, a time when the New Testament canon was already beginning to solidify. This made the Gospel of James appear as a late addition, lacking the same authority as the texts that had already been widely recognized and accepted. This temporal distrust further complicated the inclusion of the text in the official canon. The miraculous and detailed nature of the narratives in the Gospel of James also caused discord. Many of the stories, such as Mary's miraculous conception and the supernatural events surrounding her birth, were seen as exaggerated or fanciful. For church leaders concerned with orthodoxy and the purity of faith, these narratives could divert the faithful from a more realistic and sober understanding of the lives of Jesus and Mary. Finally, the critical reception of the Gospel of James among patristic scholars also contributed to its exclusion. While some church fathers mentioned the text, many did so with skepticism or even outright rejection. Origen, for example, was one who mentioned the text but did not give it significant canonical value. This mixed reception among early theologians helped solidify the view that the Gospel of James, despite its historical and spiritual value, should not be part of the New Testament. Influence and use in Christian tradition. Despite its exclusion from the official biblical canon, the Gospel of James had significant influence in Christian tradition, especially in the Catholic and Orthodox churches. One of the most notable examples is the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception of Mary. Although the idea that Mary was conceived without original sin is not explicitly mentioned in the Gospel of James, the detailed descriptions of her purity and holiness from childhood helped shape this belief. Another aspect that shows the influence of the Gospel of James is the celebration of Marian feasts. The Feast of the Nativity of Mary, for example, has its roots in the stories of Mary's childhood found in this text. These celebrations are particularly important in Catholic and Orthodox traditions, where Mary is revered in a special way. The detailed descriptions of events surrounding Mary's birth provide a rich narrative background for these festivities. In addition to the feasts, several Marian devotional practices can also be traced back to the Gospel of James. Prayers and hymns that exalt Mary's purity and holiness often draw inspiration from the descriptions found in this text. This shows how, even as an apocryphal gospel, it had a lasting impact on Christian spirituality and liturgy. Theologically, the Gospel of James also influenced Christian art and iconography. Many of the images and representations of Marian icons, stained glass, and paintings were inspired by the vivid descriptions found in the text. The scene of Mary's presentation in the temple, for example, is a recurring theme in Christian art and has its direct origin in the Gospel of James. Finally, it is important to mention that, although the Gospel of James was not accepted as canonical, it was never completely forgotten. Over the centuries, scholars and theologians have continued to study it and debate its value. Its subtle yet persistent influence demonstrates that exclusion from the canon does not necessarily imply irrelevance. On the contrary, in many respects, the Gospel of James continued to shape and enrich Christian tradition in profound and lasting ways. Comparison with other apocryphal texts. Comparing the Gospel of James with other apocryphal texts can provide a broader understanding of early Christian literature and the complexity of the canon formation process. One of the texts often compared to the Gospel of James is the Gospel of Thomas. While the Gospel of James focuses on detailed narratives about the life of Mary and the childhood of Jesus, the Gospel of Thomas is a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus. This difference in focus shows the diversity of interests and concerns among early Christians. Furthermore, the reception of these texts by the Church also varied. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, was widely rejected by ecclesiastical authorities due to its association with Gnosticism, a theological stream considered heretical. The Gospel of James, on the other hand, was not rejected for such clear heretical reasons, but rather for its lack of apostolic authentication and for some of its narratives being seen as fanciful. This distinction is important to understand the different reasons why certain texts were excluded from the canon. Another interesting apocryphal text for comparison is the Gospel of Peter. Similar to the Gospel of James, the Gospel of Peter also offers detailed narratives, but its focus is on the passion and resurrection of Jesus. This text was rejected primarily for its extravagant descriptions and apparent contradictions with the canonical Gospels. However, like the Gospel of James, it had a lasting influence, especially in the development of certain Christian traditions and practices. It is also worth mentioning the Proto-Evangelium of James in comparison with the Gospel of Philip, another apocryphal text with strong Gnostic connotations. The Gospel of Philip is known for its bold theological assertions and its emphasis on esoteric rituals. In contrast, the Gospel of James is more narrative and less theologically speculative. This difference in style and content reflects the diverse currents of thought that existed in early Christianity and how each tried to influence the Christian faith in distinct ways. Finally, comparing the Gospel of James with other apocryphal texts makes it clear that the category of apocrypha encompasses a wide range of writings with varying degrees of influence and acceptance. While some texts were quickly discarded and fell into oblivion, others, like the Gospel of James, continued to exert significant influence, albeit peripheral, on Christian tradition. This comparison helps us appreciate the richness and complexity of early Christian literature and better understand the reasons behind the formation of the biblical canon. Reflecting on the exclusion of the Gospel of James. So, folks, after all this, we are left with some intriguing questions, aren't we? After all, why was the Gospel of James, the brother of Jesus, left out of our current Bible? Was it just a matter of politics and power? Or perhaps the content of this gospel wasn't as aligned with the central message the Church wanted to convey. Think about it. How would our understanding of Christianity be today if this gospel had been included? Would we have a different view of Jesus and his family? Moreover, did you know that there are other apocryphal gospels that also didn't make it into the New Testament? What impact might these texts have had on the faith of early Christians? And, of course, the burning question, who decided what would or wouldn't be included in the Bible? What criteria were used? Here's some food for thought for you. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and share it with friends who also enjoy this type of content. Comment below with your theories and what you think about this fascinating topic. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos because there's a lot of interesting stuff coming up. See you soon.